Today is, what is today's date? October 13th, Thursday, October 13th. 2020. So we are doing our podcast today, Simon, in the heat of political discontent in the United States. So things have never been in my lifetime, and I was only a baby for the 60s. Things have never been in my lifetime, in my adult lifetime, as contentious as they are today. So the timing of us getting together and doing this podcast couldn't be better. Now, of course, I know you and I have become friends in the last few months. We speak pretty regularly, but tell the audience who you are. Tell them a little bit about your name, a little bit about yourself, and what you do.
Well, Kevin, firstly, thank you for inviting me on your podcast. It's always nice as a foreign national to feel integrated, and particularly when we're talking about such, like you say, a very interesting and challenging subject. But for your listeners, my name is Simon Osamoh. Grew up in a town west of London in England. The biggest town is called Reading, where I was actually born in a town called Wokingham. A population of around sort of 200,000, so a very large town. I mean, bearing in mind, England only has sort of 65 million population in total. Born of a white, my mother is white from the sort of the Midlands part of England, and my father is Nigerian. Very sort of brief history there. My parents separated before I was born, so never met my father. My mum was living in Nigeria just before she had me, and then moved back to the UK. And I guess really a bit about sort of my upbringing on this subject is that I pretty much spent most of my life living in sort of what I consider to be white middle class England. A very affluent part just outside of London. I myself have most probably less than 10 black friends that I can count on and say that are good people that I would ring, and sort of ask advice from. So I sort of lived in a very different society than most maybe sort of African Americans have used that sort of title over here. And, grew up, went to a school, was around 1,100 kids in my school. And I think me and my two sisters and two brothers were most probably less than sort of 10 people that had darkened skin. So, interestingly, didn't really suffer any racism. As you mentioned this conversation, I was trying to think of a time where I felt someone in my school might have said something inappropriate towards me, and I can't really recall of one. And then in my teens, became fascinated with law enforcement and ended up joining the police at 19. So an interesting perspective there, that not only did I join law enforcement young at 19, became a detective by 22, 23. I ended up working in organised crime. I was also sort of a young guy working in law enforcement. Again, we're talking in the 90s, late 90s now, in 2000s. Most of my co-workers were also white. There wasn't too many sort of people of colour within the British police. Large part similar to what you have here within the US, Kevin. There was sort of a lack of trust around the police. So a lot of feelings and emotions that I might have had were actually caused by sort of black people towards me. And then just to sort of summarise, really met my wife in the middle of all this, sort of emigrated to the US, and I have my own podcast and sort of continue my love of sort of risk management and working in sort of compliance and helping non-profits and houses of religious worship around safety. So,
and that's kind of how you and I
in an elevator pitch, Kevin. That is me.
Yeah. So you and I kind of met in the church security circles. We have mutual friends in the church security circles.
Absolutely.
So we touched base on that, I think, first through a mutual podcaster friend of ours that does that Jim Howard that does church security stuff. And so for me, it was a relief to get in touch with other people doing. I thought I was the only one in the world doing church security and not knowing what I was doing. I had limited private security, like bodyguard training, but that was about it. Right. So no, I wasn't law enforcement. So you were law enforcement in England, not in the United States. Is that about accurate?
Correct. Yes. So I, between ages 19 and 33, I was in law enforcement in the UK. Okay. And then, talking about our sort of faith for a moment, when I emigrated here to the US with my wife and young son at the time, I didn't have a job or anything lined up to go to. My wife is from Minnesota, where I live now. But within, I think it was October the 17th, 2011, when I landed off the boat, you might say. And within 8 weeks, I was offered a position at Mall of America in Minnesota, being in charge of counterterrorism. So there's a very well-respected program started actually by a friend of mine, which conducts sort of behavior analysis against the people within the shopping mall there looking for unusual behavior. And then when they see that unusual behavior, they sort of interview shoppers trying to find, mitigate the risk of terrorism and sort of crime and stuff like that.
So counterterrorism in the Mall of America.
Exactly, yeah. And so, albeit I've never worked in law enforcement in the US, that really put me in contact with the FBI, Homeland Security, TSA, Federal Air Marshals, local police. So most sort of organizations now I've sort of got friends with and sort of maintained my sort of love around sort of criminal justice. So I am, just because by nature of being an ex-detective, I'm quite nosy. I'm always quite well informed as to what's going on in that community.
I feel like you're interrogating me right now.
Well, it is. I'm trying to make it conversational, Kevin. So
I'm surprised you didn't shine a bright light in my face and ask me where I was last night.
You should go to the other side of his table. That's how it used to go down.
So for people that don't know, the Mall of America in Minnesota is huge. It's not your average shopping mall, right? They have roller coasters and stuff in there, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, when I was there, I think it was just below 5 million square feet.
Yeah.
And I think now it's just under 7. It's had like 2 more hotels have been added to it. It's owned by a company called 555, the Gramasian family out of Canada. I think they're Iranian descent. But they've also got a mall now in New York, and they really specialize on like these mega. I mean, to put into perspective for people that haven't heard of the Mall of America, Minnesota, there's a theme park inside there with roller coaster rides and everything. I mean, it's
so that would be a particular hotspot. That's like Disney here in Florida. A particular worry for terrorist attack.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think back in 2013, I went to Disney for a nice trip down there to talk at a conference which was based on sort of sports and entertainment areas. And I was talking to sort of security leaders from like the NFL, the hockey and basketball and all these different things. Anyone that had sort of like a big, large stadium in the US was there, including, and it had been hosted at Disney. But I could start with a bit of a joke and saying, well, people think that Disney is one of the biggest entertainment centers in the US. Well, actually, the Mall of America, it has more. It has around 45 million people per year go to the Mall of America, and the reason being it's free.
Yeah, it doesn't cost $86 to get in one day.
Yeah, $86, Kevin. Come on, it's like $230 for a day pass.
Oh, is it?
It's something crazy like that.
You can tell I haven't been there in years.
That's why I can remember it being in 2013 when I went. It was like $230. So it was good as a work trip. So yeah, I mean, the mall is a fantastic place. It's a great place to learn and hone your craft. And like I said, it's there's some great people that work there, and there's a lot of dedication that goes to keeping people safe.
So when you were a cop in outside of London, I'm guessing, or in London, were you did you
a bobby? Is that what you're going to say, Kevin?
Bobby. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to call it a bobby or a cop.
Yeah,
we say cop here.
Yeah, well, and it's very different. Just even the level of sort of training that goes into, and I guess I've got to most probably because I am English. I've got to say, the British police force is a model which is followed all over the world, and it's a standard that people aspire to. I mean, hopefully, I'm not coming across too big-headed saying that is the truth. The part of the US criminal justice system is based on the British.
Law. A lot of
them. I joined at 19. Everyone in England, very similar to here in the US, you have to start as a police officer. So that constable, if you like, is the bottom rank. Now we're just starting to change, but there's direct entry and you can go into some sort of key positions, but you've got to start as a constable. And in all honesty, that's where you hone your craft or verbal de-escalation, talking yourself into trouble, talking yourself out of trouble, and just knowing how broken the world is, So, like I said, I joined at 19. If you ever talk to my mum, she would always say the police force changed Simon. Well, I don't think it changed me. It really taught me how broken the world was, and then progressed ranks from there, from various different, worked on robbery teams, burglaries. Like I said, moved into organised crime. I was doing sort of surveillance techniques of, covert policing and, covert entries into people's houses and listening devices, that type of stuff. So it was a good time.
So both you and I have backgrounds in organised crime.
Yeah, you committing it and me enforcing it.
You can say that safely. Is it true that cops or constables or anybody, the police in England are unarmed? Is that true?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I had this conversation, and like my wife is white American, um, and during all the sort of George Floyd stuff, it was interesting. I spoke to someone. I said, "Well, in England, we police by consent."
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, she said, well, what do you mean you police by consent?" Well, and it's really weird because yeah, we don't carry routinely. People in British law enforcement don't carry weapons, but I want to dispel that myth for those sort of pro Second Amendment people saying if you remove our rights, anarchy is going to happen. There are people within British law enforcement that carry firearms, but just as a whole, not everyone carries. But you've got to remember that sort of particularly around the era of the 80s, that's when a lot of firearms started to be outlawed because of a lot of the mass shootings that were going. And again, the UK where it is, one nation, if you like, derived under the United Kingdom, it was very easy to ban firearms in one country. When you're in the United States, it's very, very difficult.
Yeah,
to do.
we
So,
have having 50 independent states makes it a little more complicated here. It would be like the European Union being made up of however many 23 kind of individual states now. So they've kind of taken on that Republican kind of that federalist kind of model that we use here. So this is the reason I asked, because I was going through preparing for this show. I was going through some statistics. Obviously, we're going to end up talking about police brutality on this show. It's going to be unavoidable. It's going to be unavoidable for us to talk about race. I don't know if you picked up on this, but you're black and I'm white.
There you go. Yeah.
Did you pick up on that?
I did. Yeah, you're on the left. I'm on the right on my picture as well. So there you go.
Yeah. And so I'm on the right on my picture. I guess I should be somewhere down the middle or off to the right a little bit. But so we have a situation in the United States now on top of the COVID virus that everybody's experiencing. We have a situation now where they're burning down major cities. They're rioting still 2 months, 3 months later. They're still rioting in places like Chicago and New York and Detroit and Los Angeles. So we have there is a move here in the United States to kind of defund the police and allow essentially social workers to answer nonviolent police calls and stuff like that. And there may be some merit to that, but it just, to me, if it on the left, and I'm a guy that likes his Second Amendment right. I like to keep and bear arms, right? And I've done it for years. I've managed never to shoot anybody. So it's not like you give a guy a gun, he's going to go out and shoot somebody, hopefully. But the idea of taking away the police and taking away the guns seems insane to me and people on the right. Do you find any logic in that, or how would you kind of thread that needle, being a black guy in the United States and in Minnesota where the George Floyd, I say, murder happened,
Yeah, and I guess so. If I take on like the first piece that you said about like defunding the police, and I've got to say, I have seen some scary things in my life, and I've been around some bad, evil people, all that sort of, is it nature? Is it nurture? I don't know what it is. I can tell I've sat across the table, similar to what I'm doing, about a man who murdered his son because he thought his son was going to expose him in a criminal world, and he just took a knife out and killed his son. So I mean, I wanted to sort of lay clear that I've seen some bad things in society, but if there is any danger in my life, if there's any problem that I have, I'm going to call the police, because that is what the police are there for, is to help protect me and keep me and my family safe. So my personal opinion of being a black guy living in America is it is ridiculous to say defunding the police. It's not even a conversation. But here's what I would say, from going on to a conversation I mentioned a bit earlier about being in the UK law enforcement and how it operates here. That in the UK, there's around 45, 47 recognised different law enforcement agencies of a country that has around 65 million people.
Yeah.
So there's only 47, maybe chief of police type roles in the UK in total. So it's a lot easier to build strength through training, through consistency, through collaborations and what you have here in the US.
Yeah.
So the level of training, in my belief, is far greater in the UK than what it is here, because funding is far greater. You know, where I live here in Minnesota, my police department has 28 sworn officers, I believe. I mean, my police station in the town I said I grew up had 300 officers. I mean, that's a private security guard, which is really keeping me safe. So I only say that to reinforce a point that I think they're already struggling to maintain funding and training and all these officers. And how does one person in that police department go away for a week and do a verbal de-escalation course? Well, who's going to backfill? Where are you going to get the $5,000 or $6,000 to do it? So that's the first point I'd say. And then the second thing, really, when it comes down to the saying about defunding the police, no matter where you are in the world, and I should say I've traveled to like 30, 35 countries in my 42 years, something like that. The problem that you face is that law enforcement do too much. In the UK, you're a counsellor. You know, there's a cat up in a tree, call the police. You know, I even had a guy at a hospital one time who couldn't get home, and the hospital refused to call him a taxi. He had no money, and they called the police. And I said to him, you know, why can't you walk home? And he lived like 3 miles away. And he said, well, my social worker won't take me home. You know, can you take me home? I was like, no, I'm a police officer. I'm not taking you home. You know, so there's just so many different roles and expectations. You know, mental illness. You know, for someone in the US who perhaps isn't necessarily, not by their own fault, by the organization, by the system, isn't training them for these things. They're not trained to what is being asked of them. So do I agree in defunding the police? Absolutely not. Do I agree with removing key responsibilities? Well, yes, other organizations within the US should step up and start taking some of these calls, because we're asking too much of these police officers. So are we surprised when the bubble is bursting? Well, absolutely not. You know, so you're taking someone 40, 50,000, depending what city they're in. Some police officers are paid less than that, and you're expecting them to be 5 or 6 different things. Well, not many other federal departments would ask so much of someone who's so undertrained and under-resourced.
And there are, especially in our bigger cities, there are, being a police officer is just a super dangerous, deadly job. So it's not like being a sheriff in South Dakota, right? There are, if you look at New York, Miami, Detroit, DC, Los Angeles, there are major cities in the United States where being a police officer is extremely dangerous. And after 9/11, we really exploded our investment in police departments. We've militarized to some degree our police departments in the United States, and maybe they are our first military response and should be trained accordingly. But can the same guy that's been trained to kick in doors on terrorists in the New York Police Department, can he also be tasked with the mental ill guy at the hospital? Should there be a separate branch of any police department? I'll use NYPD because they just voted to cut $1 billion out of their budget, which tells you how big their budget is if they can cut $1 billion out of it. But if they were serious about making a difference, they wouldn't take that money and put it into parks or schools or whatever other programs they want to put it in.
Yeah.
But they would they would reinvest it or divert it into different investments within the NYPD. So it is, I think it's disingenuous for people to say that they want to defund the police simply because they want better policing or less policing. I think it's punitive. I think they're trying to punish the police departments, and they're painting every cop with a broad brush. And I've had my run-ins with cops that were unreasonable, but I know a ton of cops, and they're just like you and I, and they're as kind and thoughtful as anybody else. So but I think perhaps we diluted the talent pool after 9/11 with a need for building up especially in our major cities. We needed to build up our police departments because of the terrorist threat. But are these guys, are they trained to both kick in doors and take down terrorist cells in New York and get a cat out of a tree?
Yeah, and interesting. Yeah, and you mentioned about the George Floyd, and I started to say when I'd had that conversation with my wife about police by consent, and she said, well, what does that mean? And when as well, you do police by consent because the people in the public, society have the power. We're there to help them stay safe and remove those people that are a threat to their safety. So there is this element of policing by consent. We want them to come along on the sort of journey of it. And mentioning George Floyd here in Minneapolis, this year, one of the sad things for me, and it doesn't matter, what police department you're really from, is that the saddest thing for me, before we even move on to race, was the loss of humanity. And that's what I say about the police by consent, is that the loss of humanity. And what I mean by that is that, as a 19-year-old guy joining the police, I can remember, life is what it is, but there's times when I might have said something to someone as a police officer, which I shouldn't have said. One of my co-workers would say, Simon, that was out of line there, you shouldn't have done that. I've also seen police officers act in an inappropriate way, and I've challenged them and said, hey, Kevin, that's not cool. You're overstepping the line there. And I did this as like a 19-year-old because that's who I am.
Yeah.
So the humanity for me, which I feel is missing in the US, maybe not in the US police, because I was a police officer for many years. There are many, many good people out there. But what I'm starting to see missed is the humanity that, police officers drive around cul-de-sacs. I'll be out there mowing my lawn. No one waves. No one stops and says, how are you doing? Who are you?
Yeah.
There's no real interaction to get to know the community. And the humanity was lost with George Floyd, when it's really sad and terrible that he was murdered. But what I find hardest is not the person that sat on his neck for 9 minutes and, as you say, has murdered him, is that other people within that police department stood by. And I know that people say, well, they were a trainee, they'd only been there 2 weeks, 3 weeks. That is the saddest thing for me, is that someone should have said enough, which allegedly they did, but no one pushed him off.
Yeah.
No one took more action. So where is the humanity in the protectors when we have this attitude of we've lost community policing, whatever that means, and when people don't feel, no matter how long they've been in a position where they can say, that is out of order and I'm going to take action and push you off. If I get fired, I get fired. It was one of those, like I said, the guy on there, will he get convicted of murder? Who knows? He most probably should, but he did it. The other people around, they need to take a good look at themselves and say, reflect on why didn't I take action? What caused them to not take action?
And there is
that makes sense, Kevin?
Yeah, there's a perpetual us versus them mentality. And if I'm honest, I've had it myself with police in my life, where the public in inner cities, particularly the African American community in particularly, but not exclusively, they don't trust the cops, right? And I think the narrative is what they're being told, what people in the inner city are being told is you can't trust the cops, right? The cops are out to get you. So the people speaking into their lives, probably, like my background, had a lot of run-ins with the cops, and of course you're going to have a very negative idea of the cops. Now, if I was still drinking and drugging and doing all the bad things I used to do when I was a kid, and I had children, I would probably be raising my kids the same way. Don't talk to cops. Don't trust cops, because that's kind of what I got when I was a kid, right, in my neighborhood. So there is a perpetual us versus them mentality, which is now on steroids when you look at Black Lives Matter and Antifa and riots and so I think the narrative that the mainstream media and the Democratic Party in the United States is pushing is creating more of a divide, and more scary, they're convincing African Americans that they are in danger when the cops come, and that so they're more likely to grab a taser and run away and try to shoot and all those other things. And they're also going to force white people to think to themselves, if the definition of being a racist is that I'm not marching with Black Lives Matter, and I'm not if I'm not going along with their agenda, then I'm a racist. You're going to have a lot of white people going to say, well, if that's all it takes, okay, I'm a racist, big deal, So I think they're creating racists. At the same time, they're creating that they're building more and more animosity between the people that are really trying to help them, the cops, and generally 99% of the time are trying to help, but the community that are trying to help, the community that needs them the most, is now their leaders are telling them it's okay to make a run for it. It's okay to pull a gun on a cop because he's probably going to pull a gun on you. It's okay to punch a cop because he's probably going to punch you. And it's statistically, by the way, there's very little proof that that's even an issue in the United States.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, one big difference that I see between, I was 33 when I emigrated to the US, and I've been here coming up to 10 years now, and America's been very good to me. I've really got to say that. I wouldn't know you, Kevin. There's so many great people that have come into my life from being in here in America and mentoring me and guiding me. But America also seems to, maybe because it's new, but America likes to put labels on people as well. That's one of the things I would say. I mean, in England, I think I told you before, Kevin, that I would just say that most of my friends would just say, I'm just Simon, and if you say, hey, do you know that black guy Simon? And I say, who are you talking about? And you say, Simon that lives in Reading. Oh, yeah, I know Simon. Just color, for me, color was never it wasn't a part of my sort of DNA that I need to be concerned about. And maybe we'll talk a bit more about that.
Do you think that was common in England? In other words, when I grew up in the 70s and 80s in New York City, we made fun of each other's. The Irish made fun of the Italians made fun of the Polish made fun of the blacks made fun of the Irish. Everybody was always cutting on each other. I think the difference was, and maybe this turned out to be a very bad thing, nobody ever really got their feelings hurt. In other words, we were trying to top each other's jokes. That if that environment didn't exist in Europe or in England when you were there, when you were growing up, then perhaps that's why it just isn't an issue, as much of an issue there as it is here.
Yeah, and I think maybe there was definitely banter, there was definitely humor. I don't think, particularly from my inner circle and people around my school, I don't think I suffered any racism at their
any
hands.
Hateful,
Any hateful. But but like I said, on the labels, I should mostly qualify what I mean by that is, if someone says to me where I'm from, and I said, well, I'm from England, and it's almost like, well, where are you really from? No, I'm generally, my accent gives me away. I'm from England. And I quickly learned what they're trying to get from me here in the US is, well, what's your heritage?
Yeah,
and when I said, well, my dad is Nigerian, my mum is white English, and I'm just English. There's an embarrassment about them asking that question, because they can't see me as Simon. They want to see me as, well, where's your heritage? Where have you come from, and how do you sort of get here? And one of the terms that I'd heard growing up in the UK, but very more prevalent here, was this African American term. And I've been to the doctors before, and they said, you need to fill this form in.
Yeah.
And I've gone and handed it, and they said, oh, you've not filled it in right. It's like, oh, sorry, I'm sure I've got my social security number on there, I've got my date of birth. Oh no, you've got to fill this ethnicity box in. Do you mind doing that? And I said, well, I'm not on there. And they said, well, yeah, there's African American, just tick there. I said, but I'm not African American. They said, no, just tick that box. And I've had a very nice, white lady trying to help me, and I go, that's her, maybe not a single narrative, but that's the narrative that she's had. And she's trying to convince me to tick a box. I'm not ticking African American, because I'm not African, and at that time I'm not American, So there's this desire to place labels on. I know I've got a lot of few black friends over here now, and we've sort of really spoken about, well, what does this African American title mean? And I know for them, it means about the safety and security that sort of, the government is looking out for them, because, Black history here has been suppressed. The story's not been told. But what I was trying to get to earlier is that when we put labels on, is that in my mind, some of those things try to almost segregate and put a label on. Because for me, I think when you said to me the other day, first I'm a son of God, and then second I'm English. Then so we've got to be very careful about, why can't someone just be American? This is my narrative, but I don't know why I'd have to be black and American. When I get my citizenship, why can't I just be American and want to fit in for everything America stands for? Because like I said, for me, Kevin, America's been very good and very kind to me, and I've got to, I'll always have I'll always be English, because that's where I grew up, but I'll be more than happy and blessed, excited to become American, because it's done me very well being here. But I won't label myself as a black American. Or an English black American, because that's not who I am. I'll be American when I become a citizen.
Well, strangely, I know a lot of folks that have immigrated here from other countries, generally Central America, South America, and they've gone through the immigration process legally, which takes years, by the way. It's not easy, and but they were so excited the day they got their citizenship, that their pictures are on Facebook, and they're texting me how exciting it is. And they generally have a higher appreciation for America than Americans. In other words, they, having been somewhere else and being here now,
Yeah.
they've escaped, in essence, poverty. They've escaped socialism, and now they're here in the land of opportunity, and they're so thankful. But people like me who were born here, I think we take it too much for granted, you know. So people aren't risking their lives to get out of America. They're risking their lives to get into America. So there has to be something to it. I think the fact that we're a melting pot, and we take pride in the fact that we're a melting pot, and my mother immigrated here from Ireland in 1955. We're so proud to be a cultural melting pot that that perhaps with that comes the sensitivity. So of course, we have a horrible record on race throughout our history, or at least for the first 100 years or so, 200 years. But the idea that we are African American, Irish American, Italian American, it could be problematic. It could be that the kind of the gift or the blessing of being a melting pot, and everything that, all the gifts that go along with that, Italian food, for instance. The downside to that is we do tend to congregate in groups, and now our government has kind of picked up on that, and now is exploiting that as usual for political power. So we are perhaps all that is a good explanation of the kind of the mess we're in now, right?
Yeah, because also there is that element of inclusion, wherever you are, and we see it in the UK. I mean, the UK is not, it's not immune from troubles. There's a lot of troubles over in the UK, but it's that inclusion. I guess that's what I don't like, are labels which push you away from the sort of, not the centralized system, but an inclusion that I am American and everything that it stands for. And I'll throw it out there about Black Lives Matter. I've got to say, I don't know the full ins and out. I read some of the stories about who the leaders are and burn the white churches and all this type of stuff. I know I don't really want to talk too much about that, but the general principle of supporting the underdog and those that are sort of aren't allowed opportunities, I do agree with, but I don't agree with Black Lives Matter, because what I feel we're starting to do is, well, firstly, everyone is a son or daughter of God. We are all the same.
Right.
God didn't invent sort of, different nationalities and different groups. And should we kneel during national anthem? Should we stand? We're being disrespectful. Well, all those are traditions. They're not God created. So I can, to a degree, I can see why people get upset by them. But they're traditions created. God is the higher power, and there's only one God. There's only one person. We just all look differently.
Yeah.
But I think Black Lives Matter are sort of starting a movement to sort of segregate key groups. I heard someone on a podcast one time saying, "Well, we need our own black hospitals. We need our own black schools." No, that's not the answer. Starting to segregate and create
we fought to stop that.
Yeah, exactly. And create that divide. So yes, what we've got to do, similar to what you've been saying, Kevin, is how can we create better narratives about living amongst people that are different than ourselves without necessarily having a group? Because, well, who is it next? What's going to happen next? Well, when the pendulum slings more towards people of color, is the white man then going to be sort of moved to a side and not had job opportunities? Because giving me a job just because I'm black, that isn't what I want to see. Some people might want to see. That's not what I want to see. It's like when legislation was brought in saying that you can no longer exclude black people from your establishment. Well, the law was saying to them, you've got to do this. I want that shop or that storekeeper to see a different narrative and say, Simon, you're welcome here, not me go into his store because there's a law saying there's a black man to come in. And that's where I see some of the dangers of some of these sort of Black Lives Matter movements, that we might drift more towards legislation stuff it's not going to help us. And it comes down to perhaps my upbringing of, living in this white middle class area. I said to you the other day, why is it that I felt I have been the victim of racism, but why is it in a high school of 1,100 kids, I was never really singled out as being, really different, as being black, as being, picked on and bullied because of the color of my skin? And I think my reflection since George Floyd and all the craziness that's gone on in the world is, well, why was that? Was that because there were, 1,100 good parents out there? Or was it because just as kids, there is no colour that was seen, and people could see the open narrative, and then by then it was ingrained in them that Simon's just this other kid
Regular
with his
guy,
brothers and
yeah.
sisters. Yeah, so that's an interesting thing for me, Kevin. Why do I not feel some of these things that others do? I've reflected on that quite a lot since the George Floyd incident.
There is a I was interviewing a buddy of mine who happens to be black, and we were talking about we were talking about race. I think this was prior to the election, and his argument was Trump's a racist. And I'm saying, give me an example of that. Just saying it isn't enough or whatever. But I said that what's been lost in this country from when my parents immigrated here is they assimilated, where now when people immigrate to the United States, they don't assimilate. They don't want to become Americanized or Westernized. They want to still hold their culture within the borders of the United States. And I think that creates some issues. But when I said that we should assimilate, if you come to this country, you should assimilate, he was offended. In fact, he said, well, that's a word you don't want to use, assimilate, and which is very interesting to me. So is the idea now to come to America to live in enclaves of your little demographic, or is it to come to America and work hard and provide a life for yourself and for your kids that you would never have gotten in any other country? And the truth is, America is exceptional, right? So I was watching a podcast with a Navy SEAL that I enjoy, and he was interviewing two black special operators, and the black guy said America was never. These are military guys in the United States military, and they said America was never great. And this podcast host who prides himself on not caring about people's opinions, and it's not Ben Shapiro, but not caring about their feelings, let it go. Like, he could not come up with, so three military guys in a podcast and could not come up with a time when America was great. Now, I'm a plumber. I've been a plumber my whole life. I'm a pastor now. And I could name plenty of times where America was great. When we helped with England liberate Europe from fascism, right? We defeated Japanese imperialism in the South Pacific. We fought a major war to free slaves. So I said it on Jim's podcast. Black people in America didn't free themselves. They were freed by white people. White people were also involved in the civil rights movement, and Harriet Tubman didn't sneak every single slave to the North, but they had Christian churches, by the way, white people helping facilitate the Underground Railroad all the way up to the North. So the idea that America is not great really rubs me the wrong way, and I struggle a little bit. I'll be honest with you, because I'm both a pastor and a patriot. So you and I look at our lives and I look at it like I'm kind of a third party observer. So I'm in this world, but not of this world, because I'm a child of God, right? I'm a Christian. But at the same time, I have a love and a pride of my country. And I feel offended when I take it a little bit personally when I hear people constantly trashing the United States for being this just horrific, demonic, terrible place. And historically, I mean, it's been throughout the history of humanity, it's been the best system ever developed so far. And if the standard is perfection, we're never going to get there, right? But
yeah, and it's true. And actually, I'll give you an example. I think this was most probably, I can remember the coronavirus was out because I was wearing a mask. And I think it was just before George Floyd was murdered. I was looking for a table, not a table, looking for a chair in my house. So in the town that I live in, there's a sort of small sort of boutique antique store. And I went in there looking for this chair. And I had my mask on, and this sort of woman sort of came over to me, and she said a very strange question, Kevin. She's like, are you waiting for a pizza? I was like, no. And she said, no, are you sort of waiting for a pizza? And I was just about to say, what on earth are you going on about? Are you crazy, woman? She said, oh, we get a lot of people that come in here and then they wait for the pizzas because Domino's is a few blocks down the road. And when I looked around, and here where I am in the Midwest, there's always sort of young guys living off their dad's trust fund or in their dad's car or boat. They've got a nice sort of polo shirts and well sort of presented, and sort of tag watches, all these type of guys. And I realized she was asking me because I didn't fit her narrative of being inside that store.
Somebody that should be buying antiques.
What's a young black guy in his 40s doing in the store in an antique? So she approached me about that and even sort of said, are you here? Now, for me, I didn't start shouting and screaming. I actually sort of like smiled to myself. I didn't start shouting and screaming. I just smiled and then took it for what it was. You know, she needs to widen her narrative as to the type of customer, because with all honesty, Kevin, I was most probably the richest guy in that store from what I think I could do it. But the interesting thing about that was her needing to sort of widen her narrative was how I responded to the situation. I didn't blame her. You know, it is what it is that people live in different upbringings. My mum, you know, who has, I've got two sisters, two younger adopted brothers, but we don't really say adopted, they're part of the family. When she was a teenager, she sat next to a young black girl on a bus, and she was scared by this young black girl. She sat next to on the bus. Well, clearly my mum's not a racist, because she went on to have 3 black kids and she adopted two other boys, you know, but that was her narrative at the time. So I think that there really is this, what we all have to reflect on is the narrative. What drives our narrative as to what we see, and then how do we then change that? It was, again, like I said, for me, this has been a real period of reflection. I think part of it for me is that I've never, maybe it's because of the world I've lived in, I've never really recognized color. You know, if someone has put me down, and it has happened for my ethnicity, I fight harder to get to the top. You know, so it's having some of those, you know, how you think is often how you behave. You know, I don't want the color of my skin to dictate who I am, so I work hard to get where I am.